I now recognize Mr. Kiley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today's hearing is an opportunity to acknowledge the jarring reality that for some years we did not have a functional First Amendment in this country. The vast powers of the federal government were mobilized to do the very thing that the First Amendment forbids, that is, abridge the freedom of speech of American citizens. And by using its influence over a few tech companies, its ability to pressure, to influence, to cajole, the government was able to conduct censorship at a scale and at a breadth that the founders could scarcely even have imagined, and took it to extremes that none of us previously would have imagined. It's now part of the history of this country. It's a chapter in our history that the sitting president of the United States was removed from all the leading social media platforms. The leader of one of the parties, of major parties in our country, was removed from the platforms. It's now part of the history of this country that damaging information about a presidential candidate was suppressed on the eve of the election. And then when it came to perhaps the most significant global event in a generation, COVID-19, the government assured that citizens were not even allowed to provide a truthful account as to how the pandemic began. You were not allowed to say 2 + 2 makes 4. And you also were severely restricted in your ability to provide your opinion on what the proper governmental response was. Folks had their posts deleted for even daring to suggest that a 2-year-old shouldn't be forced to wear a mask for hours on end each day. And of course, as the Supreme Court has repeatedly acknowledged, this has a chilling effect where folks then were forced to steer far clear of whatever that line of censorship might be. And so for every post that was censored, there were many, many other things that were suppressed as a result. I think this is also an opportunity to acknowledge how important the oversight of this committee was. In fact, it is likely some of the most important oversight, congressional oversight that has been done in the history of the United States Congress, is that by exposing what Mr. Schellenberger has called the Censorship-Industrial Complex, we were able to get tangible outcomes where censorship outfits were ended, specific tangible censorship operations were ended. You even had Mark Zuckerberg come out and detail exactly the governmental pressure that was brought to bear upon him. And he even went so far as to say that what Elon did for the Twitter files, Jim Jordan did for the entire industry. But beyond those specific results, I think that this oversight effort has also been successful in preventing censorship from becoming a norm in American life, which is, I think, a very important result. I mean, we forget that freedom of speech is historically anomalous. It's somewhat counterintuitive. It's not even embraced by many of our nominally democratic allies around the world today. And I think we got frighteningly close to this deeply embedded norm of our country's DNA of freedom of speech, of that starting to really weaken. And it's going to be important, I think, going forward to have guardrails in place to assure that these sort of censorship efforts don't repeat themselves. But Mr. Schellenberger, if we accept the premise, which I think is true, of course, that the censorship-industrial complex is on the defensive and certainly in retreat in the federal bureaucracy, we need to stay on guard. But are there other sites where it might be reposed? I mean, you've mentioned global institutions, but in particular, our home state of California, with bureaucracies that are just as, if not more Orwellian than some of these federal bureaucracies, with a governor who has vowed to Trump-proof the state, as well as it being the home to most of the major tech companies. Do you see risks there, and how might we conduct oversight to make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, our friend and colleague, Andrew Lowenthal, just published a report about efforts at the state level to promote censorship. And as you know, one of the big pieces of censorship that Governor Gavin Newsom promoted and others promoted was having doctors be censored for not prescribing the official orthodoxy when it came to COVID. The other thing that we see is a lot of media literacy programs. They're called media literacy. They're basically just teaching kids to accept whatever the mainstream news media tell them without questioning it. It's the opposite of what John Dewey created with his critical thinking program in the University of Chicago, this incredibly important promotion of the idea of how to think critically, not relying on expert sources, always being skeptical. So I do think there's a lot of work that we need to do, and certainly our home state is a place to start.
Thanks very much. Thanks to all the witnesses for your testimony and your assistance in this entire effort of this committee, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields.